Welcome back to the YouTube channel. Thank you for watching. Today I'm going to go over RPE, or rate of perceived exertion, and the pros and cons and using it in your training program. Okay, so again, RPE, which stands for rate of perceived exertion, is essentially a way that coaches and athletes and individuals who strength train give scores on how hard a set was. Okay, so there's many ways to go about it. You can do percentage of 1 rep max, or 3 rep max, or 5 rep max. You can do reps in reserve, or you can essentially do RPE, which is a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being the easiest, 10 being the hardest, okay? Why is this so beneficial sometimes? Well, it's the easiest one. You don't have to do any testing. So if you want to go off percentages, you'll have to have trained a certain amount of time to be able to know what your 1 rep max might be in an exercise, or a 3 rep max might be in an exercise. Whereas RPE, you could come into the gym first day, you've never trained in your life. I could give you a 20-pound dumbbell, say do 10 reps of goblet squats, and right away I can be like, give me a scale on how hard that was out of 10. Now, you don't really know what 10 might be, but at least you could give a good idea of just based on how you're feeling in that moment. You could say 7 or 8 or whatever it might be. Another good reason of why RPE is pretty useful is because it does take into account how you're feeling in the present moment. Whereas if you're working off of percentage of 1 rep maxes, or percentages, or reps and reserves, you might have a crazy 1 rep max from a time where you were more fit than you currently are. So you could be going off of a 1 rep max, and that is not your current 1 rep max. Also, days when you know you're going to be testing, you're usually more fired up and aroused for the training session, so you often get better results. On a random day where you're logging more volume, trying to make those adaptational changes to the working muscles you're targeting, it might not be the same 1 rep max versus like your daily max, okay? So that's another pro why RPE can be beneficial, is because it takes into account how you're feeling in the moment during that session. Another reason I like RPE is for exercises that are isolated. So think like shoulder raises, bicep curls, calf raises, isos, whatever it might be. You can prescribe it based on RPE. So if you're someone who works with us remotely, or even you're at a gym that has different cable stacks, so because cable stacks are always different based on the pulley systems, I could prescribe a bicep curl. I could say do 3 sets of 15, and I want it to feel like a 9 RPE. Okay, so by the 3rd set, you should be able to understand I want it to feel like a 9 out of 10 intensity. Okay, so that's pretty well almost failing, not there. So if you do your first set, and by the 15th rep, you feel like you have 6, 7, 8 more reps, you're not at enough load to make sure you're at that 9 RPE. Okay, so the next set, you would obviously go heavier, and then let's say you're at rep 15, and you think you have 2 more reps, maybe I know that 3rd set, you can stay at that weight, and you've found that 9 RPE. Okay, so that's another good way of using RPE, because in those higher volume sets, which is typically your more isolated exercises, you're going to want to take them pretty close to failure a lot of the time, and that might look different every day and also with different machines. So if you just say a universal, hey, take it to an 8 or a 9 RPE, you should be able to figure that out pretty good without me having to figure out the exact weight on the exact machine at the exact gym you're training at, okay? So that's another good thing about RPE. Now, some bad things, which that point will lead me into, is that very rarely the RPE, I say it's a scale of 0 to 10, but really it's a scale from 7 to 10, because never is a strength coach gonna go, yeah, do 3 by 15 at a 3 RPE. You know what I mean? So basically from 6, maybe 6 in like an early rehab session, I never have used 6 RPE. It's basically a scale of 7 to 10. So although it's still beneficial, it's not really like, rarely in training should you be like, oh, that felt like a 2 or a 3, and like that's good. Because that's just not enough load or stimulus to make any sort of change, okay? So that's one of the more negatives with it. Another negative is in more of the compound lifts. So you're talking deadlifts, whether squatting, bench press, weighted chin-ups. A lot of those reps always feel hard, right? Especially when you're pushing max or sub-max strength. So if you're working at around 80 to 95% of your 1 rep max, all those reps can feel difficult. And that's why they're such like great exercises, because they recruit a lot of muscles through the whole body. So it gets blurry if you're like, you know, I'm doing a 5x5 at 80%. Well, every rep is difficult, but I'm getting it through. So it's hard to be like, yeah, I don't know, 8 RPE, or like, you know how it is. Sometimes in training, you're doing a triple at like 295. You go up 10, 20 pounds, and then you're almost getting buried, like just getting out of the rep. So you could have been like, wow, that triple felt great, go up 20 pounds, and that 20 pounds makes a huge difference once you're lifting at those high loads, okay? So that is a point where I would recommend to stop using RPE just for those select exercises and use more of a reps in reserve or percentage of 1 rep max, or just relate it back to your body weight. That's another good way of doing it, okay? So that's more of a negative with RPE, is when it comes to compound lifts, it can get blurry, because usually when you're training at that level of intensity, every rep always kind of feels like an 8, 9, okay? So RPE, really good for beginners to step into the gym, just in that communication between coach and trainee, being like, how'd that feel? Give me a scale out of 1 to 10. Then as a coach, if they're saying, oh, that felt like a 6, you know you can bump the next set up, make it a bit harder. Really good in isolation exercises, because those are exercises you want a lot of reps to accumulate that fatigue. And then not so great, I would say, with more of the compound lifts and stuff like that. So learning what a 10 RPE feels like in a safe way, say in like a bicep curl or like a split squat iso, is always great. And if you're working with someone remotely or training with a coach remotely, this is kind of a universal standard just to understand. Like I said, if you're in a gym with different machines, you should understand what a 9 RPE feels like with those more isolated exercises and stuff like that. So I'm not going to say it's the best thing in the world or the worst thing in the world. I think it has tools for certain contexts with certain people, depending if they're in person or out of person, or if you can get that testing in for like percentage of 1 rep maxes and stuff like that. So quick little video on RPE and kind of what it means and how rate of perceived exertion is used in a training setting.